All right. Greetings and welcome back once again. This is Amuna Yisrael, twice in one day. For those who just joined us, welcome to the discussion. Like, subscribe, share, do all that nice, lovely, beautiful stuff. All praise be to the Creator for another day of life. Earlier today, I was speaking about, I'm jumping right into it because I was going back and forth. I was going to touch back the polygamy because I got some very interesting watch along divorce court episodes to share. So I was really torn because I really just wanted to just chill out a little bit and watch some very interesting divorce course episodes. But I said, you know what? I brought up a topic earlier today, so let me just go ahead and substantiate, let me not do sloppy scholarship here and not share some of the sources. So if we must. The slave experience of the holidays, the site that I gave you the other day with Doc South, documenting the American South. It's docsouth.unc.edu. If you go there, there is a page called The Slave Experience of the Holidays. And let's do it together, shall we? I'm going to let it read to you, and then I'm going to stop intermittently. Let me just share my screen here. Do la dee dee. Hold on. I gotta find out how I can get in between. So here we are at Doc South. I like to substantiate the things that I say for the most part, unless I'm just going off the dome and I let you know that. So here we are. This is a slave experience of the holidays. So I'm gonna let they were so gracious enough to put in a podcast. So we're gonna read along and we're gonna stop every now and then and expand this discussion a bit, right?
Welcome to the Documenting the American South Highlights podcast. Doc South is a digital publishing initiative sponsored by the University Library at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill.
Let me know if you can hear that. On my side, it sounds a little low. I don't know if it is low. Can you hear that? If you can hear it well, let me know. Hold on, let me see. That's as loud as it goes. Hold on.
American slaves experienced the Christmas holidays in many different ways. Joy, hope, and celebration were naturally a part of the season for many. For other slaves, these holidays conjured up visions of freedom and even the opportunity to bring about that freedom.
So I spoke earlier about what it represents to different people, and I don't remember reading this exact thing, but that was something that I just collected from reading different narratives. But this is good because it puts it in a summary. So yeah, for some people, they plotted all year that this time was going to be a time of freedom. I wonder if I could split this screen. Hold on one second. Let me see if I can split this screen like so, so that I can like so. Oh, oh, blam, go Muna, go Muna, hey. Oh, I'm sorry, y'all. Hold on. Let's see what we got pop lock in here, so I don't have to keep going in between the things. We working on it, y'all. Hold on. So I can let the podcast play. Do this thing right here, so we can come back over here. Boom. Don't you like it when a plan comes together? Oh, yeah. Hold on. I'm sorry. Let's go back. All right.
Still others saw it as yet another burden to be endured. This month, Documenting the American South considers the Christmas holidays as they were viewed by enslaved Americans. The prosperity and relaxed discipline associated with Christmas often enabled slaves to interact in ways that they could not during the rest of the year. They customarily received material goods from their masters, perhaps the slave's yearly allotment of clothing, an edible delicacy, or a present above and beyond what he or she needed to survive and work on the plantation.
Little trinkets, y'all. Little trinkets. Maybe you may get, because I forgot to talk about that. There was like a yearly allotment. Maybe you get 2 trousers, 1 shirt, 1 pair of shoes, and that was expected to last you. Because remember, the slaver is reduced to a perpetual child, okay? And that's the only way in which the master, the overseers, the people who put themselves in control could feel as though that the enslaved individual cannot take care of themselves, right? So you provide the food, the clothes, the shelter, and these little trinkets that keep their mind occupied. So they would get their ration of clothing from some plantation owners for the entire year. So this was a time of, for some, if it's about material possessions, well, they would feel like, you know what, this is worth it.
For this reason, among others, slaves frequently married during the Christmas season. When Dice, a female slave in Nina Hill Robinson's Aunt Dice, came to her master, quote, one Christmas Eve and asked his consent to her marriage with Caesar, end quote, her master allowed the ceremony, and a great feast was spread.
So if you want to see what he's talking about, you open it in another tab. It's the story of, let's see here. Hold on. Make it a little smaller so it fits. Could make this a little smaller. Maybe. So he just made a reference. So Aunt Dice had her own romance. However, what book is this? The Story of a Faithful Slave. Oh my goodness, I never read this one. This is so interesting. Sorry. The Story of a Faithful Slave by Nina Hill Robinson. And a lot of faithful slaves got in their feelings because they thought that if I was faithful, if I did everything that, and that was the case of Henry Box Brown, then surely the master would manumit me. Surely he would make me free. And when they found out that that wasn't the case, a lot of faithful slaves, changed up. But okay, so that's that. I never read this one, but I will read what he's referencing. Chapter 3. Aunt Dice. Hold on, I can't see this thing here. Why is it doing that? Ooh. Let's see. I don't see the little oh, there we go. Oh, there we go. 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 All right. Boom. I'll make it a little bigger because I ain't trying to strain my eyes, y'all. This is a little Lev project reminiscent. So Aunt Dice, he says, page 25. Aunt Dice had her own romance. However, on her sorrow, or her sorrow as it seems more fitting, a term, a Negro's tale of love. Few guess the tragedy that lies buried beneath the social exterior of Negro life, bravely bearing their domestic troubles, even cheerfully taking them up as their allotted portion. The master was somewhat surprised when Aunt Dice came to him one Christmas Eve and asked his consent to her marriage with Caesar. Once again, the master became this perpetual father. That's why it's called, the patriarchal system of slavery. The master was the father for the mother, for the woman, the man, and the children. Your children didn't belong to you. The wife didn't belong to you. The husband didn't belong to you. So when we look at all the things that have been stripped away and all the things that's wrong with the people today, you have to look at the system and the mindset. Um, a handsomely stately Negro from a neighboring plantation. I am sorry to hear this, Dicey, he said slowly, and perhaps this was the most lengthened advice he had ever given her. I hardly like the Negro. He's too great a beau among the women, too fond of gabbing about. However, I shall do the best I can for you. Caesar was and then it goes on. So basically, they were proving in that they would go during this time because the master would be most gracious. He would be in his Christmas spirit. So what he usually wouldn't do, he would do. I have to read this book. Oh my goodness. That's another thing with me and these narratives, man. They're addicting, man. Anyway, let's go on. I'll let it continue.
Dice and Caesar were married, quote, in the mistress's own parlor, before the white minister. More than any other time of year, Christmas provided slaves with the latitude and prosperity that made a formal wedding possible. On the plantation, the transfer of Christmas gifts from master to slave was often accompanied by a curious ritual. On Christmas Day, quote, it was always customary in those days to catch people's Christmas gifts, and they would give you something, end quote. Slaves and children would lie in wait for those with the means to provide presents and capture them, crying Christmas gift, and refusing to release their prisoners until they received a gift in return.
So let's see what story they're getting this from. So there was all these little customs along the way. This custom develops and that custom develops. It says, what book is this? This is page 22 here. This is The Slave Adventure Toward Freedom. How many people have read these things? Non-fiction. not fiction, but the true story of a struggle by Peter Bruner. Okay, there goes the speaking likeness. I'm on live of Peter Bruner as he appeared to the students of Miami University, where he served as a janitor for many changing and interesting years. So this is the face here of the man who's sharing this story. Look at his face. His name is Peter Bruner. Introductory. In this book, I have given the actual experience of my life. I thought in putting it in this form, it might be of some inspiration to the struggling men and women. Are you reading it? In this great free land of ours, every person, no matter how humble or how great seems the handicap by industry and saving, can reach a position of independence and be of service to mankind. This is Peter Bruner's face. So he's telling about his experience. In page 22, it says, when I would take the right toll out of the corn, the sack would contain just as much then as it did before it was ground. He would have me to take 5 toll dishes out of the 3 bushels of corn where there should only have been 3. That was all the law allowed, and if I did not take out 5, he would whip me for it, punish me for doing right. I would tell him sometimes I wished he would take him out at once and I would be done suffering in this world. He went to town that night, and when he came back, we don't know who he's talking about because I kind of started there, but I wanted to read the paragraph before. He cowhided me until the blood streamed down my back. He was mad because I said I wished that he would murk him, but he was full of whiskey every time he did this. Sounds like he's talking either about the master or the overseer. You got to read the book to find out. One Christmas morning, he was returning from town, and so I thought I would catch this Christmas gift. It was always customary in those days to catch people's Christmas gifts, and they would give you something. Instead of giving me the kind of Christmas present I desired, he took me and threw me in the tan vat and nearly drowned me. Every time I made an attempt to get out, he would kick me back in again until I was almost dead. At last, I came up on the other side and jumped out before he was able to get around me. And he sounds like he's talking about this abusive master, which is interesting. Let me see how long this book is. This book ain't long either. This book could get dealt with, y'all. How many people want us to do some Love Project reading? This book is not long at all. And Peter Bruner has a number of pictures. Book is not long. Could definitely be read. Let's see here. Let me keep playing here.
This ironic annual inversion of power occasionally allowed slaves to acquire real power. Henry, a slave whose tragic life and death is recounted in Martha Griffith Brown's Autobiography of a Female Slave, saved Christmas gifts and money to buy his freedom. Some slaves saw Christmas as an opportunity to escape. They took advantage of relaxed work schedules and the holiday travels of slaveholders who were too far away to stop them.
Didn't I tell y'all? This is what was going on during this was the holiday spirit of your foreparents. It was like, oh, where are we gonna slip on out of here?
While some slaveholders presumably treated the holiday as any other workday, numerous authors record a variety of holiday traditions, including the suspension of work for celebration and family visits. Because many slaves had spouses, children, and family who were owned by different masters and who lived on other properties, slaves often requested passes to travel and visit family during this time. Some slaves used the passes to explain their presence on the road and delay the discovery of their escape through their master's expectation that they would soon return from their, quote, family visit.
So again, that's another thing that a lot of the families suffered was this thought of abroad marriages, like they just referenced that what was her name? She wanted to marry on a guy from another plantation. A lot of these plantations were miles apart, 3 miles apart, 6 miles apart, 10 miles apart, and the men couldn't. Oftentimes, it was the men who got passes and not the women. Okay, and that's interesting because even on another level, that thought is deep, right? The men got passes and the women didn't. So it was more customary to see men on the road than it was women, men enslaved men than it was enslaved women. And so during this time, they would be able to come and see their counterparts. So there was a lot of, even though they may have cohabited in certain spaces, there was a lot of rearing of the children by oneself or within a group of women because the men weren't present, or they didn't belong into the same plantation, or they were sold off, all manner of things.
Jermaine Logan plotted a Christmas escape, stockpiling supplies and waiting for travel passes, knowing the cover of the holidays was essential for success. Quote, Lord, speed the day. Freedom begins with the holidays, end quote.
Do you hear that? So while we're looking at holidays as a place to become a new type of a slave, which is debt slave, a place where you're going to run up 500, 600, $700,000 in debt, they were looking at it as a way in which one could be free. What is it? I'm coming in a minute. Here it is on page 262. He's talking about a gunfight, it looks like. And then he says, LORD, speed the day. Freedom begins with the holidays. And then they hollering amen. But we could continue to read that at another story. Man, this is so. The other thing is that lately, my eyes and the screen, I would really, some of these are very short. I might have to print them off to read them. But let me just, where was I at here? Let's keep listening.
These plans turned out to be wise, as Logan and his companions were almost caught crossing a river into Ohio, but were left alone because the white men thought they were free men, quote, who have been to Kentucky to spend the holidays with their friends, end quote. Scenes in the life of Harriet Tubman describes Tubman's successful effort to help her brothers escape at Christmas. Their master intended to sell them after Christmas, but was delayed by the holiday. The brothers were expected to spend the day with their elderly mother, but met Tubman in secret. She helped them travel north, gaining a head start on the master, who did not discover their disappearance until the end of the holidays.
Speaking of Harriet Tubman, the conversation that I had before this, two times before this, where it was talking about the parallelisms of Israelite references during slavery, it came to me afterwards, after I already proved my point with Israelites. But even if you look up on the same site, if you look up keywords such as the Promised Land, such as Moses, such as just these references of Canaan, they're replete throughout all of these narratives. And one thing that came to me concerning the thought process, if you don't know what I'm talking about, it's okay. But one thing that came to me was that Harriet was called the Moses of her people, right? So here goes another reference to biblical Israelites and the plight of the melanated peoples in the Americas, right? So I didn't come back to talk about that, but as I see Harriet tell me here, she was called Moses of her people. That's what she was called because of the parallels. So that's another parallel that is undeniable, but I'll continue for the sake of sticking on the subject.
Likewise, William and Ellen Crafts escaped together at Christmas time. They took advantage of passes that were clearly meant for temporary use. Ellen, quote, obtained a pass from her mistress, allowing her to be away for a few days. The cabinet maker with whom I worked gave me a similar paper, but said that he needed my services very much and wished me to return as soon as the time grant was up, writes William. I thanked him kindly, but somehow I have not been able to make it convenient to return yet. And as the free air of good old England agrees so well with my wife and our dear little ones, as well as with myself, it is not at all likely we shall return at present to the peculiar institution of chains and stripes.
And that's what they call slavery, the peculiar institution. If you ever hear anybody speak about the peculiar institution, they're talking about the institution of slavery that resulted from the transatlantic slave trade. So that's another key word uh, that used to be used, not so much frequent anymore, is the peculiar institution. Okay. Um, and so yes, that this was a time where, because they knew that, like in the story of Harriet Tubman, that they would be sold when after Christmas for the New Year's, just like I was saying. So I'm just fact checking myself in public so that you can understand that a lot of the stuff I'm sharing with you is based on what it is that I have read. This is how I know what I'm sharing, because y'all gonna have to hold on for me 1 second. Just hold on for me 1 second. Yeah, some babies was over there turned up. I had to go see them real quick. All right, well, let's get to playing.
Unquote. Christmas could represent not only physical freedom, but spiritual freedom, as well as the hope for better things to come. The main protagonist of Martha Griffin Brown's Autobiography of a Female Slave, Anne, found little positive value in the slaveholder's version of Christmas, equating it with, quote, all sorts of culinary preparations, end quote, and extensive house-cleaning rituals. But she saw the possibility for a better future in the story of the life of Christ. Quote, this same Jesus, whom the civilized world now worship as their Lord, was once lowly, outcast, and despised, born of the most hated people of the world, laid in the manger of a stable at Bethlehem. This Jesus is worshipped now, end quote. For Anne, Christmas symbolized the birth of the very hope she used to survive her captivity.
So this whole thought of the primping and the prodding and the this and the that, they were experiencing the same thing. Actually, they were the people who were made to make the extra biscuits and make the extra gravy and sew the extra clothes and do all of these things so that people, because remember, there was no necessarily mass production at that time besides human physical labor. It wasn't like factories are coming out of China or India, whatever the case may be. So a lot of the very hard, grueling manual labor was done by their hands. So this time, like you see today with the holiday frenzy and the holiday rush and people going to the stores, this was the expectations of melanated people to produce more so that they can do whatever it is that the slave master had for them. Another thing that I think I neglected to bring up, I was listening to something. I forgot why I wanted to bring it up, but I'm gonna bring it up anyway, and then it'll come to me, was that there was an expectation that after you worked in the field, you also worked again when you were at home. So no time was really yours. Like there were some slave masters who expected the women to spin the yarn when they were home, spin a certain amount of spindles of yarn after you did all the labor in the field. You were expected to come back to the house and spin yarn, a certain amount of yarn by the morning. The men, some made brooms for themselves, but there were things that they were expected to do after the night had set in by candlelight. You understand what I'm saying? So it was like trying to get the maximum amount of labor out of people. So when you're living in that type of harsh environment, any opportunity, just kind of like today, to not have to go in there, not have to do these things, were taken for whatever reason. Well, you could have told them it was, whatever, you could have told them anything, and they would be like, "Yep, I'll take it." But I'll continue.
Not all enslaved African Americans viewed the holidays as a time of celebration and hope. Rather, Christmas served only to highlight their lack of freedom. As a young boy, Lewis Hughes was bought in December and introduced to his new household on Christmas Eve. Quote,
That's who I was trying to remember earlier today. When I said the last name was Hughes. The story was Lewis Hughes. Hold on. And we did read that story. I was trying to remember his name and it was escaping me. But that's what's his name, Lewis Hughes.
as a Christmas gift to the madam. End quote. When Peter Bruner tried to claim a Christmas gift from his master, quote, he took me and threw me in the tan vat and nearly drowned me. Every time I made an attempt to get out, he would kick me back in again until I was almost dead. End quote.
So let me get the name of the book. It was the narrative of, let me see what the name of the book was. He goes into great detail of, let me see. Here it is. Autobiography of Lewis Hughes. From Bondage to Freedom. That's the name of the book. The institution of slavery as seen on the plantation in the home of the planter. That's his name. And this is his face. That's Lewis Hughes right there. That's him. And this is the book, 30 Years a Slave by Lewis Hughes. So he speaks about being a houseboy, being sold from different masters. He speaks about the slave market and all of his, he speaks about the whipping, the slave whipping as a business, which was interesting. Some people didn't want to whip their own slaves, so they hired them out to be whipped. There was a key phrase that I saw reoccurring, which is this 30 and 9 lashes that you see right here. 30 and 9, as it's called. And they were going by what they were saying is a biblical principle that you're not supposed to go beyond 40 lashes. But it wasn't talking about the context that they were putting it in, but that was for everyday punishment. They would whip you 30 and 9. I'm not going to go into that right now. Auction block, the price of slaves, what was happening with him. Now, hold on. Let me see what this was, page 13. So here he says, at length, after a long and wearisome journey, we reached the Potomac McGee's home on Christmas Eve. Boss took me into the house and into the sitting room where all the family were assembled and presented me as a Christmas gift to the madame, his wife. So people over here trading iPods and this and that, and just a short 200, 300 years ago in this country, some of the ancestors were the gift. They were being presented as gifts in the form of an enslaved individual. It's something to think about, not necessarily to be stuck in that time, but to really understand if we're not valuing where we are right now and becoming debt slaves, enslaved to the system, is something to really just consider as we're talking about reparations and all the other
Frederick
things.
Douglass described the period of respite that was granted to slaves every year between Christmas and New Year's Day as a psychological tool of the oppressor. In his 1845 narrative, Douglass wrote that slaves celebrated the winter holidays by engaging in activities such as, quote, playing ball, wrestling, running foot races, fiddling, dancing, and drinking whiskey, end quote.
This is what I was talking about earlier, and I did say it was Frederick Douglass, so let's go there. I likes to substantiate. How you guys doing this day? I wanted to come. I'm probably gonna come probably tomorrow. I want to follow up on that polygyny conversation, but I already put all of this information out there, so I said, why not? This is page 75, Frederick Douglass. Sorry. This is Frederick Douglass, so let's back up. Okay, Frederick says, the term of actual service to Mr. Edward Covey ended on Christmas Day, 1833. The days between Christmas and New Year's Day are allowed as holidays, and accordingly, we were not required to perform any labor, more than feed and take care of the stock. This time we regard it as our own by the grace of our masters, and we therefore used or abused it nearly as we pleased. So a whole 2 weeks of 2 weeks, it says from no, about a week and some change, to do whatever you want. This time, however, was spent in various ways. The staid, sober thinking, and industrious ones of our number would employ themselves in making corn brooms and mats and horse collars and baskets. And another class, so some people were like, yo, I'm not sleeping. I'm gonna go, get it in. I'm gonna be entrepreneurial. I'm gonna get in and do what I could do. Another class of us will spend the time in hunting possums, hares, and coons, but by far the larger part engaged in such sports and merriments as playing ball, wrestling, running foot races, fiddling, dancing, and drinking whiskey. And this later mode of spending the time was by far the most agreeable to the feelings of our master. Did you hear what he said? I'm just giving you this little bit of time for you to get through to the next year. I really don't want you to be industrious. I really don't want you to begin to look at things beyond the plantation. So he says the latter was what was supported. Is that not the same today? The question of whether or not playing ball on the field, on the basketball court, on the football field, if playing ball, I'd rather you play ball. I'd rather you be wrestling. I'd rather you be doing track and field. I'd rather you be dancing, twerking while playing the flute. I'd rather you be doing this. There's nothing much has changed. This is why this is very important to read. Than spending your time was by far the most agreeable to the feelings of the master. This is Frederick Douglass. A slave who would work during the holidays was considered by our masters as scarcely deserving them. So basically, you know how some people be like, oh, you over here, I guess you're not tired enough. I guess I'm not working you enough. So you should be grateful for the little scrappings that I give you, and the fact that you're actually working to do something for yourself during this time where my Christmas spirit has kicked in is an offense, an affront. Pay attention because we're talking about the psychology of this discussion. A slave who would work during the holidays was considered by our masters as scarcely deserving them. He was regarded as one who rejected the favor of his master. It was deemed a disgrace not to get drunk at Christmas, and he was regarded as lazy indeed who had not provided himself with the necessary means during the year to get whiskey enough to last him through the Christmas. Meaning, if you ain't had no beer money, you ain't had no liquor money, and you couldn't pop bottles at the club, you was lazy. Because now you can't stunt when Christmas time come around. Nothing has changed. I tell people all the time, they had clubs during slavery. Everybody who is here now was here then. There's nothing new under the sun. Solomon said it in the book of Ecclesiastes. They had clubs during slavery. I don't know if I've shared it before, but I know I've shared it, but maybe not in this context. They had people who like to go out, drink, and dance during slavery. They had clubs. Getting hot in the club, all of the stuff that you're seeing today. And like Frederick Douglass is saying, different people dealt with their oppression differently. From what I know of the effect of these holidays upon the slave, I believe them to be among the most effective means in the hands of the slaveholder in keeping down the spirit of insurrection. Were the slaveholders at once to abandon this practice, I have not the slightest doubt it would lead to an immediate insurrection among the slaves. These holidays serve as conductors or safety valves to carry off the rebellious spirit of enslaved humanity. Are you listening? But for these, the slave would be forced up to the wildest desperation, and woe betide the slaveholder the day he ventures to remove or hinder the operation of those conductors. I warn him that in such an event a spirit will go forth in their midst, more to be dreaded than the most appalling earthquake. The holidays are part and parcel of a gross fraud, a wrong. This is Frederick Douglass. This is not Amuna and inhumanity of slavery. They are professively a custom established by the benevolence of the slaveholders, but I undertake to say it is the result of selfishness and one of the grossest frauds committed upon the downtrodden slave. They do not give the slaves this time because they would not like to have their work during its continuance, but because they know they know it would be unsafe to deprive them of it. This will be seen by the fact that the slaveholders like to have their slaves spend those days just as such a manner as to make them as glad of their ending as of their beginning. Their object seems to be to disgust their slaves with freedom by plunging them into the lowest depths of dissipation. For instance, the slaveholders not only like to see the slave drink on their own accord, but will adopt various plans to make him drunk. One plan is to make bets on their slaves as to who can drink the most whiskey without getting drunk. And in this way, they succeed in getting whole multitudes to drink in excess. Thus, when the slave asks for virtuous freedom, the cunning slave master or holder, knowing his ignorance, cheats him with a dose of vicious dissipation. And it goes on. And it goes on. It goes on. Wait, let me just read this. Hold on. It says, artfully labeled with the name of liberty. The most of us used to drink it down, and the result was just what might be supposed. Many of us were led to think that there was little to choose between liberty and freedom. We felt, and very properly too, that we had almost as well be slaves to be as to rum. So when the holidays ended, we staggered up from the filth of our wallowing, took a long breath, and marched to the field, feeling upon the whole rather glad to go, for what our master had deceived us into a belief was freedom back to the arms of slavery. And if you haven't read this book, the name of this particular book is Narrative of the Life of Frederick Douglass, an American Slave. All right, let's go back. Let's continue listening. It's almost done. Thank you for those who have just joined us. Like I said, I just wanted to come and substantiate some of the things that I said earlier.
He took particular umbrage at the latter practice, which was often encouraged by slave owners through various tactics. Quote, one plan was to make bets on their slaves as to who can drink the most whiskey without getting drunk. And in this way they succeed in getting whole multitudes to drink to excess. In his book, My Bondage and My Freedom, Douglass concluded that, quote, all the license allowed during the holidays appears to have no other object than to disgust the slaves with their temporary freedom and to make them as glad to return to their work as they were to leave it, end quote. While there is no doubt that many enjoy these holidays, Douglass acutely discerned that they were granted not merely in a spirit of charity or conviviality, but also to appease those who yearned for freedom, ultimately serving the ulterior motives of slave owners.
All right, now what did I say earlier?
For links to the works and collections mentioned, and for other titles,
I said the bipolar spirit of the holidays. Hold on now, I got too much stuff going on. Let me make this bigger. Anybody have any questions or comments? Feel free to share. I'm coming. Just wait. And so that's what I had with that. What time is it? I made that short. I probably will come back. Probably gonna rest up. I wanted to come back and follow up on the poly conversation because like I said, I came across some interesting divorce court episodes that I think will make for some good talking points. But again, all of this stuff is here for your perusal. It's not something hidden. It's not something you have to pay for. You literally could click a link. So I'm going to put some of these links in a box. How about that? So this one is Lewis Hughes. You can read the story or you can tune into us reading the story. And we actually had on a young man who said that he traced his lineage and found out that Lewis Hughes was one of his great, 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 great ancestors. So that's Lewis Hughes' story right there. This is Frederick Douglass's story if you haven't read it in its fullness. Up Frederick Douglass's story right here. And this is not us saying what they felt about slavery. This is them saying their experience and what was happening. And as we can see, liquor sales. Let me just do something. Let me just do something because I'm that type of person, right? Let's just prove our thing. This is Jermaine Wesley here. So when we're talking, we're not just, and here Peter Bruner. This one is short, y'all. This one is short. Peter Bruner. This is just to show how accessible the knowledge is. Now, if we find value in it, I happen to find value in it. And this is the Nina Hill Robinson. When she went and wanted to marry Caesar. She was trying to get it in with Caesar, and she had to go ask Massa if she could marry Caesar. Some of these, I'm going to have to do some perusing on. What was I going to say? I almost forgot what I was going to say. What was I saying, y'all? Ooh. Family and friends escaped during Christmas to prevent separation. Here, I just found something here. They had some things on the side, so let me just see. There was something I was going to say. It's going to come back to me. It says, the plantation adjoining Mr. This is page 64 from The Life of John Hopkins, a fugitive slave, containing his history of 25 years in bondage and his providential escape, written by himself, 1812. Okay. What did I say the page was? 62? 62. Oopsie. Was it 62? Oh, here. All right. It says, this is what, close to chapter 10. Where are we here? I'm trying to find out what it was talking about. I lost it. Where did it go? It was telling you his experience of what was happening on Christmas. Let me go back. I missed the. Hold on, y'all. Hope everybody's doing well. Let me click this again. Family and friends escape on Christmas to prevent being sold. It's 65. That's why I couldn't find it. The plantation adjoining Mr. Burkitt's was owned by a rich planter, Robert Dennis, Esquire. He was a very kind master, always treated his slaves well. When you read these narratives, you always either hear he was a mean master, and then they go on to say because he beat you or he didn't feed you, or he was a kind master because he didn't beat you and he did feed you. It's always a similar uh, description of the master as it relates to whether or not they were a good master or a wicked master. Um, he always treated his slaves well, would never whip them himself, nor suffer another person to do so, and would not sell them. Consequently, B was much beloved by his slaves, who regarded him as a father. I just said that right earlier. The slaves, grown men, grown women, were reduced to perpetual children. And so, therefore, the master was the person who provided every need for them. Okay. He had a great number of well looking slave men, women, and children, over whom he would have no overseer, but trusted all to them in cultivating his large tract of land. Nor did they ever betray his trust or give him any trouble. But at length happened a sad event to these slaves. At the death of their much beloved master, sorrow now filled their hearts, and a spread of gloom over the whole plantation. For now, like other slaves, they must be separated and sold from their friends and families, some perhaps to cruel masters. They knew the estate was somewhat in debt and expected to have to be sold to cancel it, at least part of them. Because remember, a lot of these men, these European men, were taking loans. You actually could use a melanated body for to mortgage. You could actually mortgage a slave. I mean, it was crazy. I mean, when you talk about when you go to a bank and they say, "Do you have any collateral?" and you say, "Oh, I have a house, or I have a boat, or I have a car," they could say, "I have 50 slaves." And so, if this individual defaults on their loan, then these slaves could be sold for the loan, for the payment on the repayment of the loan. This is why a lot of places, like they're saying here, the slaves would be sold to compensate the lender for the debt that the so-called master owed. So when we talk about economics, once we grow up out of the spot of, once we adjust the things of the hurt and the pain that we felt for what was happening, then you get to look at the fact that it was economics. Like the economics that you're seeing today, that's what was happening. It's just that many people weren't privy to that part of it. You just saw the results of it by saying, hey, such and such will sell, but not realizing, like in today's space and time, you had the repo man, you had insurance claims and policies. They had insurance on the heads of slaves. If anything happened, then they can go and collect monies. I mean, it was, yeah. Let me go ahead. Where is it? Where am I at here? Uh, okay. Like other slaves, they must be separated and sold from their family and friends. Some, perhaps, to cruel masters. They knew their state was somewhat in debt and expected to have to be sold to cancel it, at least part of them. I said I'm coming, just hold on. This would have been done by but for Miss Betsy, who would not endure the idea of seeing her grandfather's devoted slaves sold to pay debts which they had no hand in contracting. She watched for an opportunity when, unseen by the white people, she could go to the slave quarters, and having found one, she immediately hastened there and told them that she had some bad news for them, but dared not communicate it until they pledged themselves not to betray her, which they readily did, as they did not wish to bring harm upon her, which they knew they should do by telling of her. So they told, so she told them, sorry, you know what's going on here? Hold on one second. The screen is too bright. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Let's turn down the screen here. All right, boom. Where am I? So Miss Betsy is like, yo, I gotta tell you something real quick. You can't drop no dime on me. She then told them that there was some dispute about the settlement of their escape, which it was thought could not be settled without selling them all, which she said she could not bear to see done. They all exclaimed at once, what shall we do? Like, we don't know what to do, perpetual children, reduce your autonomy, reduce all of these things. And now they going back to her asking her, what should they do? She answered frankly, you had better make your escape. They said they knew not where to go, nor how to do. She told them that their Christmas holidays were near at hand, when they would have permission to go to visit their friends and relatives. She recommended them then to obtain of their master John passes for this purpose, each of which was to be for a different direction from the others, then leave for the free states. So they're saying that the European slave master wife was the one who tipped them off that they're going to be sold and that they should make a run for it. Most of them did as she directed, obtained their passes, left for the free states, and have not since been seen at their old home. Miss Betsy is the performed a good deed, yet she was soon after betrayed, and that too by a slave, an old woman whose sons escaped with the rest, made a terrible fuss, crying and lamenting to a great rate, and saying that Miss Betsy had sent all her children off to the Jaris, meaning New Jersey, which was the which was the only free state of which she seemed to have any idea, and she should never see them again. I got so much stuff to say right now. She continued in this way until it came to the ears of the white people, who inquired of Miss Betsy about it. She denied all knowledge of the matter and said, Cousin John, do you think I would advise the slaves to run away? I have said nothing to them about being sold. Old Priss, is always drunk and knows not what she says. This particularly quieted the ears, but did not remove all suspicion, and they still thought that Miss Betsy was in some way concerned in their fear. So when the estate was divided, they did not give her as much as would wrap around her finger, and she lived a poor girl for several years. Subsequently, she moved to Baltimore, where she married a poor man, but God remembered her. Each of the blacks whom she helped to escape from bondage, upon hearing of her poverty and her place of residence, sent her $50, $800 in all, as a token of their thankfulness and gratitude. Those who did not leave according to her direction were all sold. And this I was reading out of the life of John Hopkins. Oh, sorry, Tompkins. I'm thinking about the medical school. This is a fugitive slave containing his history of 25 years in bondage. That was an interesting story. I mean, man, they got me wanting to dive back into the Left Project. That was an interesting story to see how and why um, some people would, who didn't get an escape or who didn't get their come up, or who maybe, because there was some people who were too old to run or too feeble to run, and they began to feel indifferent and resentful. And according to the narrative that he shared, she turns around and tries to get the woman who gave them a heads up, tried to get her in trouble. So that sheds a different light on a lot of things, doesn't it? So that's what I wanted to come and share. I'm not, where we at? We have 50 minutes. So I'm going to go ahead. I gave a lot of sources in here that you can go back over and read for yourself. Does that say that in today's space and time, that you're still a slave? It depends. It depends on whether or not you're still looking at it like in the way that Frederick Douglass describe them. If you're still waiting just for the holidays to get some relief, and the entire year you're under hard pressure with no relief, then yeah, there's a possibility that you may be economically enslaved, financially enslaved to the system in many similar ways that melanated bodies were back then. So there's something to be learned if we're willing to. I want to thank everybody for tuning in. Everybody seems to be quiet. So I'm gonna just lead us right here, like they like to say. We'll go give the baby something to eat. But I'm gonna leave this right here because I find it interesting, and I'm gonna go back over and read some of these short stories because they add to my collection here, um, and help me to share some of the things that I've learned with you uh, in a better way. So with that said, thank everybody for tuning in. Share this with someone that you love. Share the links so we can have educated, informed discussion. We're going to shine light into dark places and stop repeating rhetoric. Okay? We need to shade. We need to color in. We need to define the lines. I'll leave you with this. I used to go to art school and I used to like be a wild sketcher. You know what I mean? Just like sketching kind of crazy. And the art teacher, like, define your lines. You know what I'm saying? There's one thing when you're just sketching, and there's another thing where the artwork is so detailed that it becomes real to you. And right now, many people are sketching uh, this time period like I used to write. You know what I mean? Like I used to draw like crazy, like and it's like, where's the defined lines? Where's the shading? Where's the coloring? Where are the things that make it real? Not just, oh, it was really bad. Like we just saw an old lady sell out the Euro lady, Miss Betsy, who told them, you know what I mean, be up on game. And because she didn't go, now she's gonna make sure that everybody goes down. Hey Jason, what's going on? Long time no hear. So I'm about to wrap up now because I got to go get a baby something. But when we come back at another time, I want to talk about the poly conversation that I haven't talked about in a few videos because I have some interesting things to share. All right. So with that said, thank everybody for tuning in. It's probably not going to be today, but we'll talk again. All right. One.